Vandy's poor preparation and lack of adjustment spelled disaster in Atlanta. So what now?
You are Locked On Vandy, your daily podcast on the Vanderbilt Commodores, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Vandy podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Corey Burton. Thanks for making Locked On Vandy your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Go to 5hourenergy.com and use promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off of your order. On today's episode, we're going to deep dive into Vandy's inexcusable loss to Georgia State. There's a lot of issues to unpack here. Vandy had a bad week of preparation, which led to failure in all aspects of the program. But Vandy's inability to adjust and regroup after a poor start just really spelled disaster in Atlanta. So what now? And that's the golden question. What now? Okay. And listen, this loss was as bad as any other, and for a lot of different reasons. And I try not to be overly negative because I know that's not what's needed. And as a coach, I know that, you have to rise above that whole concept of thinking negatively and, the sky is falling, is going to crush us. And, we've got to be on to the next one. Okay. So that's after this episode, we're going to unpack it. We're going to leave it at that. And we're going to move on to the next one. But I think that we have to talk about some of these issues that plagued this team. And so I don't want to be overly negative. And this kind of reminds me of basketball season a little bit where, the loss just kind of looks like, hey, we probably were the better team, but like this went wrong, that went wrong, and everything just kind of spiraled. Well, that's a little bit about what happened here. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the tail of the tape, okay? We're going to go to the tail of the tape, and we're going to say, all right, this is what happened, okay? There's the score. Vandy lost 36-32, in case you missed that part. But here's the tail of the tape. Georgia State gained 426 total yards on offense. 157 of those were rush yards, 269 through the air, 25 first downs, and they did have one giveaway. Vandy, 380 total yards, 110 of them on the ground, 270 through the air, 23 first downs, and also a turnover as well. So, and there's kind of a turnover on special teams if you count the safety, but I mean, just look at these numbers here, man. Like defensively, just getting gashed, and a lot of that was on the last drive. I mean, they were very successful on the ground, through the air. They were moderately successful, about equal there. But just looking at those total yards, I mean, that team should not be pushing you around. You're the SEC team, and you are the more talented team. So they should not be pushing you around like that. But when you really kind of think about it, though, like we had Dave Cohen on last week, and from a talent standpoint, Georgia State does have some guys that have transferred from Power 4 schools. So it's not like they have a bunch of bums or a bunch of like, hey, these guys are like a banana peel away from just being high school players. Like they have a legit program with legit transfer caliber players. So they do have good players. I really like their quarterback, Christian Veyer. I think it's Veyer. I really like their running game. Their running backs were really good. That receiver, Hurst, was outstanding. I mean, they had some really good players. Their team speed was pretty good. And, they sit in the middle of one of the most fertile recruiting grounds in the entire country, not only the state of Georgia, but metro Atlanta. Or they sit in the middle of downtown Atlanta, but the surrounding areas in Atlanta are rich with talent. So, like, even if they get third, fourth, even fifth fiddle recruits, there's enough of them in the state of Georgia for them to sustain a pretty good roster if you add some transfer portal guys. So they have the capability of putting together a pretty good roster. I will say that. All right. In saying that, still, there's no excuse for Vandy, an SEC team, to go down there and lose the way they lost. Okay, so here's some takeaways, and there's probably some more within here, and there's some sub points for sure. But this is the overall. This is the overall takeaways, man. The energy and preparation I thought were horrendous. Okay, and we'll start there. Okay, because to win a game like this, if you want to go on the road, you have to have the energy to get off to a fast start, because you have to manage the road environment, because it's going to be, I mean, it wasn't very hostile at Georgia State because the weather sucked, but they just didn't handle the conditions very well. They didn't handle the being on the road very well. The stadium was lit weird. They probably, I mean, just all the factors leading up to the game, it just didn't seem like that they were locked in. They were dialed in. Like the mental preparation all week was terrible. Coming off a game like Alcorn State, then you're playing, Georgia State, they're nothing. They barely squeaked by Chattanooga. And I can see where the lack of focus comes. So nobody on that sideline, nobody, Clark Lea himself included, looked like they wanted to be there. Nobody wanted to be there. They played like they didn't want to be there. They just wanted to get in, get out, get back to Nashville. They thought they could roll out there. You see the V on the side of the helmet, and that meant that Georgia State was just going to roll over. Well, they were wrong, right? They were wrong. Georgia State did not roll over. Georgia State, this was their Super Bowl, because in 2019, they went up to Knoxville and beat Tennessee, which happened to be a pretty decent Tennessee team that year. They went up there and beat them, right? Well, they're going to add Vanderbilt they added Vanderbilt to that resume. Now Georgia State owns the state of Tennessee, basically. They beat Chattanooga, and they beat Vandy. They already had the volunteer skin on their wall. So that's just, it was, their energy was up. Vandy's was down. It just seemed like nobody cared. That's what it felt like, if I'm being honest. It just felt like nobody cared. Things were spiraling. The offensive line was getting pushed around. The defensive line was getting gashed. Coverages were being busted. Veilleux he had time to throw on a lot of occasions. Some occasions they did, it happened in it flickered. The energy flickered on every once in a while, and they got a sack, big play, or it flickered there at the end when they felt, oh crap, we're about to lose this game, so we need to have a little sense of urgency. Like, that's the energy they needed to start the game with, and it probably would have been a runaway. But no, it's not what we got. And this is a valuable lesson. You have to bring it every single week. Doesn't matter who you're playing. They brought it against Alcorn State. What happened? 55-0. They brought it against Virginia Tech. What happened? Well, they almost lost, because Virginia Tech's a good team, but they had the resolve, they had the resiliency, and they got that one done. But you have to bring it every single week. This is a valuable lesson. Okay? I mean, the kids played hard. I can't, they played hard. They played hard. They just weren't locked in. You know what I mean? It's not that when I say they don't care, just their attention to detail was down. They had severe lack of focus, because it didn't seem like it was a game they were interested in, right? And it just, Georgia State understood that, and they capitalized on it. And when you have a lack of focus like that, sometimes you get stupid penalties. You turn the ball over in the end zone on a kickoff on special teams. You don't cover well on a punt. You don't cover well on a kickoff. I think the field goal unit didn't. I think it came out. You missed a field goal, I think. Just overall, generally sloppy play, and it just wasn't good. And Clark Lea said all week that the energy at practice wasn't good. The mindset wasn't good, and it led to a bad week, which led to an utter failure on Saturday. So what it comes down to, if you're going to have any chance at winning any game moving forward, including Ball State, you have to come out. Okay, your next game, you got a week to lick your wounds, but your next game is on the road at Missouri. It's a tough place. So you better, between now and then, figure out how the hell you're going to handle a road environment, because Georgia State, Center Park Stadium, and Folsom Field, or no, whatever they call Missouri Stadium, that place, totally different. So you better come ready to roll. All right. But again, I looked at this game and I said, I don't know what the plan is. I don't know what they're trying to do. And that felt eerily similar to last year. I'll talk about that next. Right. Want to get in shape, but you have trouble staying motivated? Does that sound familiar? Make 5-hour energy shots part of your lifestyle and get the energy boost you need to get fit. We all know you sometimes do not want to go to the gym. Take a 5-hour energy shot to give you the feeling and alertness so you can get to the gym. Grab a 5-hour energy shot to stay alert. So, with zero sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-hour energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and more. There's a flavor for everyone. Try them all. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors, and it is delivered right to your door. So, if you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5-hour energy product today, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, welcome back. We are back. Thank you for making Locked On Vandy your first listen each and every day. Hope you guys are still with me. You everydayers, man, you guys are awesome. I love you guys. Couldn't do it without you. Hopefully, not going to do it without you during this stretch run, because I know there's a lot of you that are upset, and hopefully, if you're jumping ship, you're not jumping ship on this show, because I'm gonna keep it 100, as they say. All right, I'm gonna tell you how it is, how I feel, and I'm not going to tell you what I think you want to hear, whether it's good or bad. I'm going to tell you what I feel. I'm going to try to be as positive as I can, because that's what you need. So this game was, I can't sugarcoat this at all. Okay. And you've probably heard me say this. I know 700 and something of you heard me say it on my YouTube short that I created right after the game, but this game was horrendous, right? This game was awful on a lot of ways. There was flickers of good moments, and I don't want to take away from those good moments, but as we unfold this bye week, we're going to unpack on like, hey, these are the good moments that they need to capitalize on and build on, and they need to try to find it within themselves to figure out how to get some juice. But let's see, where do I start? So I'm going to jump around here a little bit. I'm going to go down to number 4, and I'm going to kind of work number 4 back into 2 and 3. All right. These are just 5 of the many takeaways that I had. There's a lot of takeaways that I had in watching this game. But the first thing I was looking at, I was trying to figure out what are we trying to do? And I could not answer that. There was no adjustments either. It just seemed like, okay, what are we doing here? Well, it seemed like we were just in a scrimmage situation. Like, hey, we're going to see if they just fight their way out of this thing. Like, I don't know what the game plan was, because offensively, I couldn't tell. Defensively, I don't know what they were trying to stop. Like, I don't know, because it didn't seem like they were really stopping anything, because they weren't getting a ton of pressure on Veyer. When they did, it affected them, obviously, and then they stopped again. It just seemed like they went to an ultra conservative shell. It was like, okay, We're going to try not to lose this game. I guess the best way to sum it up is we're going to try not to lose this game. So what was the game plan exactly? Like defensively, you knew, like if you watched film, which I'm sure they did, but like they run the ball well. And I don't feel like we had a plan for that. I don't know what the thinking was. And then they kept running the ball well. So I'm like, how are we adjusting here? Like, what are we doing to get people in run lanes so that they have to stop their momentum? It just, the backs were patient and they were picking their way through. I mean, blocker, like it just seemed like their offensive line had their way with our defensive line. Like it didn't seem like we were adjusting too much. All right. Offensively, they understood what we do well, which is run the option game. They were taking the dive away. They were taking Cedric Alexander away. They were taking Pavia away. And then you couple that with some stupid penalties, and you take the first touchdown off the board from Cedric Alexander. That turns into a field goal. Like you keep that touchdown on the board, it might be a different game, right? But like it just didn't seem like our offense was really like trying to figure out how they were stopping, right? It just seemed like, oh, they're stopping us, so we're just going to try different things. And they had a little bit of success passing the ball, which was good. That was good to see. I can't say everything was horrendous, but this is something that you're going to have to figure out, because the coaching in the SEC is really, really good. So like if you can't adjust to an already non-existent game plan for all intents and purposes, if you can't adjust, you're going to get blown out, because teams are just going to come at you different ways, and you've got to have answers to that, right? So like they stop something, you got to have an answer to it, and didn't seem like Vandy had an answer to it, or they were trying to not put things. I don't know what they were trying to do, to be honest with you, but it just, where's the adjustment, right? Where is it? Where's the urgency? I'm going back to point number one. The energy was bad. It just seemed like there was a lack of urgency, which was until the very end, which was too little too late. But like, I just don't understand what we were trying to do on both sides of the ball. It was eerily similar to everything last year, where you just were like, I don't really know what we're trying to do here. And then things kind of snowballed. They got some confidence, and then they started just stopping things, and Vandy had no answers. Vandy was like, they were sitting there like this, proverbially, the proverbial two hands out, like, oh boy, like, what are we doing here? Why are we surrender, Koba? I don't know what was, I would love to be a fly on the wall in those headsets and figure out what was going on, because I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell what adjustments we were making. I couldn't tell what communication we were having. It sure didn't seem like the defensive front and the secondary were on the same page ever. And it was just bad all around. Right, defense looked confused. Defensive line was getting pushed around, which is, didn't happen the first 2 weeks. Like, we were the aggressor. We didn't have that aggressive mentality that we had earlier. Like, it seemed like Clark Lea went into a shell and everybody else just kind of followed suit, because like, I think one of the things about going back to my original point, I think one of the things about, and this kind of ties into the current one, but one of the things about the reason why Vandy beat Virginia Tech, even though they were on the ropes there in the second half and kind of made some crucial mistakes, was that Vandy played with fire in that game, right? They played with urgency. They played like they knew they were better. And Clark Lea reinforced that. He had energy. He was making adjustments. He was yelling at people, yelling at the refs. He was coaching hard. I had something I'd never seen him before, right? But this game, it seemed like the more things that went wrong, he kind of retracted a little bit. And you can't, as the head coach, you can't do that. Like, you look at Kirby Smart against he was. I mean, I don't know that you should be a raving lunatic on the sideline if that's not who you are personally. But like, I think there needs to be somewhere kind of in between for Clark Lea. Like, I think he, the quiet, reserved, whatever stuff. I know you've got to call plays defensively, and you've got to be collected for that. But there's a way to be collected and be able to get your point across with energy and enthusiasm. And I just don't think it happened. And so, any adjustments, it just kind of seemed like as he retracted back into his shell a little bit, it just kind of seemed like things got lost and he just lost the ability to adjust. Like, I think when things get kind of crazy and haywire and, what's hitting the fan, sometimes I think he takes a step back, and I think he just kind of loses it, right? He just kind of loses his ability to, I don't know if he knows what to do or if he's trying to figure out what to do, or like, hey, how am I going to get this team motivated? Like, I don't know what the case is, but you got to make adjustments. You got to coach them hard, and you got to get those guys believing that they're the better team. And I just, at the very end of it, I don't think we believed that we were the better team here. I think that we kind of were like, oh boy, like this is, and that's what's going to turn out as a fatal flaw for Clark Lea and his tenure as Vandy's head football coach, is the fact that he can't adjust in big moments when needed. He lacks the energy for the most part, and he just, as a head coach, gets overwhelmed. And you can't do that as a head coach. You got to be able to handle that kind of stuff. And it just didn't look like he handled it all that well. And that may be a case where, like I said about Jerry Stackhouse, great coach. He's on the bench for the Golden State Warriors, so it's not like he's out of coaching. He's on the bench. He's on Steve Kerr's bench now as an assistant coach. Like, that's where Jerry Stackhouse fits. I don't know if he'll ever be a head coach again. He probably will get another shot somewhere, but like maybe we're at the time where, hey, Clark Lea will be a hell of a defense coordinator somewhere. Maybe we're seeing that this thing is overwhelming him a little bit, and you just got to get somebody that can handle it, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what's next. Like, that's the leading question. What's next? So I just think, we're going to dive into the offense and defense a little bit. Special teams is awful, and the officials were, God, terrible. We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you now through September 22nd, which is rapidly approaching. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, welcome back. We are wrapping up the show here. FanDuel, man, you guys got to lock into that. FanDuel.com. Download that app today. It's a great app. But we're wrapping up here, man. We're here's some takeaways from the game. We're trying to figure out energy, preparation, adjustments, all that stuff. I think that kind of feeds into, that's kind of the bigger problem, but the symptoms are like the offense and the defense, right? The offense was sloppy till the last couple of series. It was a little too late. Defensive line got bullied in the run game. Secondary was a mess, and special teams was awful. You fumble out of the back of the end. You fumble out of the end zone on a kickoff to let up a safety, and that gave them a lot of momentum before halftime. So, and a bonus feature is the officiating was terrible, but offense was, as we get a little more specific in the takeaways, like offense was sloppy. They were missing assignments. Pavia just seemed like he just didn't have that Pavia magic. His leadership just kind of, I don't know if this Raising Cane's thing went to his head. I don't know, but just he wasn't the Diego Pavia from the previous 2 weeks. He just wasn't that guy. He's got to find himself between now and the time they step foot on the field at Missouri. Like sometime between now and then, Diego Pavia's got to refine himself because the Pavia we knew from 2 weeks ago stayed home in Atlanta, right? Defense, the secondary was a mess. CJ Taylor got ejected. I'll get into that a little bit, but I don't necessarily agree with that. But there's the defensive line got pushed around, very little pressure. I don't think the game plan was very aggressive. The secondary, they're not talking, they're not gelling. Like everybody seems just kind of confused, and technique was bad. Colby Taylor he had a rough go. He had a rough go. He gave up 7 catches. We'll call it 100 yards, and he let up 2 touchdowns on him. And he made all that noise in the first game, and had to, I think he had a little bit of a in-house suspension there, a quiet hush suspension. But dude, like if you're going to do that, you got to back it up, man. And some of his technical flaws were put on display for sure. Georgia State found them somebody to pick on, and they picked on him. He had a rough game. Hopefully he'll bounce back. So what next, man? That's the question we got to answer in the next 4 minutes, and we can answer that all throughout the week. But what next? Okay, the refs were awful. The SEC officiating has to be better. It wasn't just this game that they were bad. The SEC crews were just bad all around, because they throw a flag, they take 5 minutes to discuss it because they don't really know what they threw, and then they call a penalty. You're like, what? I don't think they really know what targeting is. I don't think CJ Taylor targeted. The roughing the passer penalty was questionable. There was a few holds in there that I think they got hold happy. I think it just felt like anytime Vanderbilt did something good, they had to throw a flag on it, and felt like they needed to be a part of the game, which, I think there's a fine line of, okay, we have to throw a flag on some of these things, but like there's also some instances where it's okay to let them play some too. Like unless it's egregious and horrendous, I think there's some scenarios where I think you can let them play. Like not everything has to. You could throw a flag on every play if you really wanted to. If you're really like Johnny Rulebook, you could throw a flag on every play. You really could. But fact of the matter is this: they tried to, and that was awful. That crew was awful, and a lot of it. And it wasn't. I would have said this probably if Vandy ended up winning. I don't think it had anything to do with Vandy winning or losing. They were awful. I just don't think they knew what they were calling. They had to have a long conference on every time they threw a flag. It's like, why'd you throw the flag? I don't know what I saw. Like it's almost like, hey, I threw a flag. I don't really know. They were overwhelmed. They were awful. I just had to say that. I'm never a blame the refs guy ever. I hate that. Actually, but this crew is especially bad. So what's next? Okay. Now I'm going to take you guys through some scenarios. Okay. So what's next? All right. What's next is going to be determined on how they finish out the season. All right. If they finish out the season and they win a few games, they get a few conference wins, and they can, salvage a good season, I think this will just be a blip on the radar, and they'll be like, okay, whatever. We can point this and say this is an aberration. Okay. And I think that, it's obvious that Clark Lea has done some good things coming into this season. Again, it may have been too little too late for him, but I do think there's some good things happening. Scenario 2, this game sparks a series of where you don't win another game for the rest of the year. You go, you maybe you beat Ball State. You go 3-9 with a loss to Georgia State. I think it's time in that scenario, right? You go 3-9 with one of those 9 losses being Georgia State. I think you've got to look at who's going to be next to fill in these shoes, because you can't have a program and you can't sustain a program. You can't expect people to invest in NIL. You can't get high school recruits. You can't get transfer portal guys to come year in and year out knowing what they're going to walk into. So if you want to play in that world, well, you're going to have to make a move that maybe is unpopular amongst the crew. Now, do I think Clark Lea's a bad coach? No, he wouldn't be in this position if he was a bad coach. I think there is a lot of coaching talent there. I think he has a really good staff. I think he has a lot of talent. But as a head coach, I think there's some insurmountable flaws here that I just don't know that he can get by. And that's okay. Not everybody's built to be a head coach. There's some great defensive coordinators out there that are defensive coordinators that aren't great head coaches. And that's okay. He certainly, as far as a defensive coordinator, I think if that's all he was focusing on, I think he'd be really good. I know it's hard to say after this game, but I just don't know. Honestly, at this moment, I just don't know if I can confidently say that this program is in a great place. They were, after the first 2 weeks, you were like, okay, this got some promise, and then they took 3 steps backwards back to the starting line, and now we're right back to where we were. So I think you're at a crossroads here. I think this is a very, very crucial game here against Missouri. Now, Missouri's a great team, and you still may not beat them, but you can't go on the road and get shellacked. You go on the road and get shellacked, I just think it's the beginning of the end there. Okay, so you're at a very important crossroads here. What now? You got to fix what's happening. If we're in save the job mode at this point, and I'm not sure, unfortunately, that it can be. And I hate to be negative. I just hate to be that way. But I just think there's some truth there. And we learned that with Jerry Stackhouse. Unfortunately, we're probably about to learn it with Clark Lea. That it's just not the right fit. Maybe not the right fit. I don't know. But what's next? We're going to see. We're going to see how the season plays out. There's still a lot of football left. I urge you guys to stick around, support this team, maybe help overcome this obstacle, and let's go. All right. Maybe you can turn a negative into a positive. I don't know. But what's next is Clark Lea and the team had better put their blinders on and just full steam ahead to Missouri, because if you get shellacked, then I think that's the end of the road. So I'm going to leave you there with that. We'll continue this discussion probably all week. It's a bye week, so we're going to try to figure out how we're going to fix this thing, and we're going to move and move on. So that game's behind. That game's buried. Now we just take the lessons from it and continue to expound on that. Thank you for listening. We'll see you back here next time on the Locked On Vandy podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. Anchor down.